It's the Battle of the Bastards. Jon and the Stark army versus Ramsay and the Bolton army. And over in Meereen, Daenerys has another battle on her hands before meeting Yara and Theon. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. Particularly if you're a first-time viewer, please do consider subscribing if you enjoy the video. This is an explanation of Season 6, Episode 9 of Game of Thrones, The Battle of the Bastards, in the light of all we now know. I'll pick out the areas of foreshadowing and hints of what is to come, as well as explaining what was really going on at the time. Obviously, if you aren't up to date with the TV show, then be wary of spoilers. Like most seasons of Game of Thrones, Episode 9 of the season has the biggest budget and one of the longest run times. It is deliberately epic with massive conflicts and far-reaching consequences. A lot happens. But unlike most Game of Thrones episodes, we focus in on just two storylines: the battle for Winterfell and the battle for Meereen. Let's start with Meereen. The slavers appear to have continued their bombardment of Meereen from their ships despite Daenerys' return on Drogon. Daenerys obviously wants to go on the attack, so Grey Worm's earlier plan to retreat to the Great Pyramid seems to have gone by the wayside. And we then have a fascinating vignette showing how the relationship between Daenerys and Tyrion will be crucial to how she goes about her invasion of Westeros. Dany's instinct is to not only decimate the army she is facing, but fly over to the cities they came from and destroy them utterly too. Tyrion persuades her not to, telling her about her father's plan to destroy King's Landing, killing thousands of innocent people. Daenerys' plan, and her way of thinking, is actually not that different to her father's. But she relents, agreeing to meet the slavers first to see if a deal can be struck before attacking them, and apparently abandoning the idea of destroying their cities. This is an important moment, because it shows that although Dany's first instincts are often reminiscent of the Mad King's, she also has a great capacity to listen to advice. The extent of her willingness to do this, rather than just launch straight into attack mode, will shape a lot of the action in Seasons 7 and 8, as will whether Tyrion is there by her side to give her that advice. This time, however, the slavers are not willing to negotiate. So Daenerys climbs on top of Drogon, the other two dragons break free from their captivity, and the slavers' fleet is destroyed. Tyrion, always thinking one step ahead of everyone else, saves the lives of one of the slavers so that he can tell everyone back in Yunkai and Astapor what happens when you say no to Daenerys Targaryen. There's not a lot to say about the action here, other than that this is not a fight between equals. Dany's dragon's firepower is so completely overwhelming that the slavers' ships don't stand a chance. It will be the same against the armies of Westeros. George R.R. Martin talks about the dragons as being the nuclear weapons of Westeros. It isn't warfare, it's mass slaughter. Later, Yara and Theon arrive in Meereen in an attempt to strike a deal with Dany. This was a plan that Yara stole from Euron when he won the Ironborn support at the Kingsmoot. Daenerys is clearly tempted. The Ironborn fleet that Yara brought with her is exactly what she needs to carry her own troops across the Narrow Sea, and she clearly trusts Tyrion's judgment on whether she can trust Yara and Theon. Tyrion has met Theon before, of course, back in Winterfell at the start of Season 1, and he doesn't seem to have a good impression of him from then, which is probably fair. Theon was a different man back then, proud and arrogant. But if you re-watch the scenes they have together, then it's hard not to view Tyrion as being exactly the same. He taunts Theon over his status and his father's humiliating defeat in a rebellion a few years before the series started. Theon has gone on a huge journey in personal development, but so has Tyrion. He isn't the same man we saw when the show started. And here he seems persuaded that Yara and Theon can be trusted. Daenerys pushes for and gets a deal that recognises the independence of the Iron Islands, but guarantees that they will never reave or raid the coasts of Westeros again. This isn't just a throwaway commitment. The Iron Islanders have been attacking the coast of the Seven Kingdoms on and off for centuries, millennia even. By agreeing to this, Yara is agreeing to impose massive cultural change on her people. Her own family's motto, "We do not sow," sums this up. The Greyjoys do not sow because they do not farm. They take what they want from others, using violence if necessary. This agreement would change all that. And whether or not the TV series will show us, it's clear that bringing about such a change would be a massive task for Yara. This scene is also the most obvious sign so far of one of the most undeniable themes in Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire. At the start of the series, all of the power resided with men. Here we have two women striking a deal while men watch on, and we'll see again in the next episode that the most powerful members of most of the ruling houses are now female. Daenerys Targaryen, Cersei Lannister, Olenna Tyrell, Alara Sand, and so on. We'll see in seasons 7 and 8 whether this will lead to a change in the way things are done in Westeros, but the initial signs are unfortunately not promising. It is a much needed corrective to the patriarchal system that prevented women from achieving positions of power, but it would be an overreaction to see this détente between Daenerys and Yara as a complete overhaul of the way of doing things in Westeros. This is still the Targaryen heir sealing a deal with the Greyjoy heir to ensure that both historic noble families stay in power. And the offer of an invasion fleet shows that this will be achieved by force. These are women at the head of their houses rather than men, but they are still playing the Game of Thrones. They are still planning for war, and they are still hungry for power for themselves. In Yara's case, in place of her legally elected uncle, and in Daenerys' place, despite never having set foot on the mainland of the continent she wants to rule. In the north, the Stark army have reached Winterfell for their showdown with Ramsay's army, and they are very outnumbered. They have the wildlings and a smattering of minor houses on their side, including House Mormont, but that's it. The Glovers refuse to help, and although Brienne has yet to return from River Run, she has sent a raven ahead to let Sansa know that the Blackfish refused his support too. And to make things worse, the wildlings were fighting among themselves. This is not a large army or a well-disciplined one. In contrast, the Boltons have their own troops, plus the Karstarks and the Umbers and most of the other large houses in the north, and they have the advantage of being in possession of Winterfell itself. In short, the Boltons have a huge advantage. But Jon was insistent that the battle be joined now, before winter set in. A pre-battle parley doesn't really change the situation much. Ramsay offers terms for the Stark surrender, and Jon counters with an offer of one-on-one combat, which Ramsay obviously doesn't accept. Ramsay then threatens Rickon, who he has captured, and Lyanna Mormont gives him a death stare. And that's pretty much it. A battle planning session in the Stark's command tent is equally unhelpful. Sansa admonishes Jon for dragging them into battle when they were so obviously outnumbered, and warns him that Ramsay shouldn't be taken lightly. Jon dismisses her concerns, even though you can see that he isn't happy with the situation himself, and, perhaps recognising the likely outcome of the battle, visits Melisandre to ask her not to resurrect him again if he dies the next day. The Jon we see on the eve of battle is not the confident man we once knew. There's a sense of him going through the motions here. At the least, he has lost his enjoyment of life. This should not be a surprise to us. He has been through a lot, after all. And we know from Beric Dondarrion that every time someone is brought back from death, they lose part of themselves. And Jon has undoubtedly lost part of his spirit here. Turning to Davos for a moment, a twist of fate has meant that the Stark army is now camped where Stannis' army had camped many months earlier when they attacked Winterfell, and Davos, out on a wander, discovers where Meereen was burned alive. He finds the stag toy that he gave her, charred by the fire, and realises how she died. He evidently decides not to confront Melisandre on the eve of the battle, which, given how angry he is, says a lot about how he prioritises the greater good over his own desires. But next episode he will. The next morning, the two armies line up to face each other, and as Sansa warned, Ramsay is up to his old tricks. He releases Rickon, sending him running towards the Stark lines, but shoots him before he can make it there. This prompts Jon into running forward on his own to try to save Rickon, ruining any battle plan the Starks might have had before the battle has even started. It's a curious move, heroic and stupid in equal measure. But let's just take a moment to consider Rickon. His death here, like the rest of his story arc, really is pretty meaningless. He was just a small boy at Winterfell, then travelled with Bran for a while before heading off with Osha without ever really impacting on the wider plot. His death is also pretty anticlimactic. The turning point of the battle was actually the arrival later of the Knights of the Vale, not this little drama. All of which adds more credence to the theory that the names of the Stark children's direwolves tell us about their owner's fate. Rickon's wolf is called Shaggy Dog, and a Shaggy Dog story is a long meandering tale that ultimately has little meaning or purpose, like Rickon's story. As another example, Jon's direwolf is called Ghost, and Jon has died but still lives in some way. I've done a video elsewhere setting out how the names of all of the direwolves map across to their owners' fates if you want to check it out. Anyway, the battle progresses as you would expect it to, with the Boltons' greater strength in numbers having a decisive effect. Jon himself is nearly crushed to death by the dead bodies of his own men in a piece of cinematography deliberately reminiscent of Daenerys when she was held aloft by the slaves she had freed. As an aside, there is a symmetry to their stories, with her symbolically starting again back with the Dothraki at the beginning of this season, and him symbolically starting again at the beginning of this season as his own man, free from the Night's Watch. And both will end the season in a more powerful position than ever before, as head of an invasion fleet and as King of the North. But to the battle. Everything changes when Littlefinger arrives with the Knights of the Vale. He has answered Sansa's call, which she made without Jon's knowledge or approval. The Knights of the Vale, it should probably be noted, are a renowned fighting force in Westeros, and have managed to stay out of pretty much all the battles so far in the rather protracted War of the Five Kings, so they are fresh and at full strength, and their impact is decisive. The Bolton army is broken, and Ramsay is forced to retreat back to Winterfell. Now, Littlefinger is playing several games here, as always. He is trying to get back into Sansa's good books after she blamed him for handing her over to Ramsay. He is aligning the Vale with House Stark to make a strong northern alliance, presumably thinking that Sansa will be recognised as ruling lady. And he is also still carrying a warrant from Cersei, saying that if he uses the Knights of the Vale to retake Winterfell from the Boltons, she will recognise him as Lord Paramount of the North. But to just comment on the politics or tactics of this battle would be to miss out on what is most striking about this episode. The Battle of the Bastards is filmed in a deliberately visceral way. We see most of the action from the level of the combatants, witnessing first-hand the brutality of medieval warfare. Whether you live or die is an accident, as arrows hail down, people slip in the mud, and blood and confusion of warfare engulfs everyone. This, I think, was a deliberate directorial decision. War is not being shown as an heroic thing. There are acts of heroism within it, to be sure, and it's hard not to be stirred by the action, but the overwhelming impression that the viewer is left with is one of the suffering and meaningless of it all, not the heroism. Just a couple of years earlier, most of the soldiers on the Bolton side were lining up to defend the honour of the Starks. Now they are fighting to end the Starks' claim on Winterfell forever, and most of them probably don't understand or care either way. But back to the action. 1-1 breaks down Winterfell's gate before being killed in a hail of arrows, and Jon finally corners Ramsay and starts pummeling him into submission, only stopping when he sees Sansa. And he effectively allows her the right to do with Ramsay as she wishes. She seems happy to take it, and chooses to feed Ramsay to his own dogs. The dogs he had used to torture and kill so many others. This is a dark moment. Before he dies, Ramsay tells Sansa that part of him is in her now, and she evidently enjoyed Ramsay's death. As always, we aren't spoon-fed answers here, we are left to draw our own conclusions. Ramsay undoubtedly did many horrific things, so did he deserve this death? Or is this just poetic justice for all he has done? Was he evil, or just suffering from some rather severe mental health problem? And what does all of this tell us about Sansa? Is the sweet summer child of Season 1 now entirely gone? Or was this a one-off? A reasonable and justifiable response to what he did to her? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And what else struck you about this episode? Did you spot anything I didn't? Let me know. If you'd like to support me in producing more videos like this, as well as getting access to more of my content, please click through to my Patreon page. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to know when my next video comes out, then please click on the subscribe button and make sure your notifications are enabled. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.